that a lot of other mainstream titles lacked, and was why she went, obviously got asked to do more high-profile work for DC. Interestingly enough, something that I wasn't even aware of, I don't remember it from when I was reading the book, which is surprising, is that when she was assigned to work on Action Comics, it was with John Byrne. If you remember, that's where she got her start, was just viciously mocking him in her first Yabs column. Now that run didn't last long. Unlike other times, this was not supposedly due to any issues with their work, but because DC had begun a, quote, policy of rotating creative teams. But it did lead to her being assigned to Villains United as a part of the Infinite Crisis story. And again, she brought that team-building dynamic approach, but took characters that, if the Birds of Prey characters are C-listers, some of the people in Villains United aren't even on the list. I don't know that I had ever heard of Catman before that series. But obviously, given the proliferation of wonderful cat memes on the internet, Catman was just a great character choice in terms of rehabilitating somebody that nobody cared about and making him a character that people not only loved, but somebody that, Simone has essentially established who this character is for readers moving forward in the next 20 to 25 years. There are no other seminal Catman stories other than the ones that she's written. And eventually wound to her getting to do Secret Six. Now, if you didn't read Secret Six, I'm a huge sucker for the sort of Dirty Dozen take on superheroics. I love redemption stories, and it always occurred to me that for somebody that did not grow up in the industry, like Gail Simone, by which I mean she wasn't one of these people that was farmed by the industry and then, groomed on various little things before given all this stuff. She came to it late in life. Her story in comics is a redemption story. It's her finally getting to do what she wants to do, and to do that with characters like the ones in Secret Six, like the ones in Villains United. In the end, what it does is it created a fan base for not just her, but a fan base for these characters. And it also, if they were a fan of those characters, they're a fan of her. There are no fans of those characters that are not fans of Gail Simone, and there are no real fans of Gail Simone that are not fans of those characters. In the end, that wound up leading to probably her highest profile assignment in the old 52, or not the old 52, but the old DCU, which was when they tried to do Wonder Woman. Now, Wonder Woman, as probably everybody here knows, is a really tricky character to get right. Many creators have tried and very few have succeeded, both commercially and critically. There are notable exceptions. The George Perez run in the late 80s achieved both commercial and critical success. The current run by Brian Azzarello has achieved a large amount of critical success from certain sectors, a large amount of criticism from other sectors, but has definitely achieved commercial success, which, if you follow the industry, is really the bottom line for DC. If it sells, it's going to stay on the shelves, for the most part, and that's going to come up when we talk about Batgirl. Gail's run did very well critically in terms of how people responded to the book. Sales-wise, it did not achieve the numbers that DC was looking for. She actually had a great story when she left Wonder Woman. She talked about hearing stories from, as she puts it, women who used Wonder Woman to explain about might for right to their daughters. They used Wonder Woman as an example to get out of abusive relationships, help them get through chemotherapy, come out to family and friends. And my favorite was, last month somebody told me that my Wonder Woman stories had helped him get off a most extremely dark path of depression when he needed it most, and now he's much, much better. For me, talking about I talked at the beginning about why I started Capeless Crusader. Comics giving you solace, lifting you up in times when you really need it. And so whether or not, the fans, the reviewers, the retailers really drove this book to succeed, if it brought somebody out of a depression and the conceivable results of that depression, I think she succeeded. Wonder Woman saved people. And that's what these characters are really supposed to do. And it's obvious in her comments that she has a huge amount of respect for the character, and her role as a symbol of empowerment. But, DC made a decision to go in a different direction. They gave the character to J. Michael Straczynski, who, while I am a huge fan of a lot of his work, was not necessarily the greatest choice. It was very easy to see what he was doing, but he sort of neutered the character in a lot of the ways that were really important. And there was a good reason why they simply washed their hands of that when they went to the New 52. Now, what happened with Gail Simone when they went to the New 52 was they put her on Batgirl. Who here either was reading or is reading Batgirl? You are?
What was? I've fallen off in the last few months.
You've fallen off in the last few months. As have I.
basically did a catch up because I work at a comic book store part-time, so I flew through the last couple of issues, I think.
Okay. Do you remember there was a pretty significant amount of hubbub when the title first came out, and I'm sure you guys remember why, right?
Yeah.
So, is everybody here familiar with that? No?
Yeah. No,
So, you know, if you read Birds of Prey, which...
No, I do know. I was just
Oh, you
going
do
to
know.
say, I love Gail, but I dropped.
You dropped, and is it because of the change to Barbara? And that was actually...
I gave it a try, though, because she pleaded with us.
I know she
Gave it
did.
a try.
I know she did, and when you say that she pleaded with us, that's a really important aspect that we're gonna touch on a little bit later when I talk about how she uses social media. And actually, since everybody here is familiar with what happened in Batgirl, I won't waste your time. But that was a very tricky decision. She's treading the line between those people that simply love Batgirl because of the way Barbara was characterized in Birds of Prey, those people that love the character for the specific demographic that she appealed to as a result of her disability, and people who did enjoy the idea that you could empower a physically disabled character in a way that brought her out of that disability. And that's a very tricky line to walk, because while she can do it in comics and they are working to come up with a reasonable explanation as to what happened to Barbara, that's a lot more problematic in the real world, and it disconnected her from a lot of those fans. As with before, she wound up departing the book due to disagreements with editorial, and as with before, we still do not know specifically why. But what happened was when the new group editor, Brian Cunningham, was brought onto the book, he pretty much immediately terminated Gail Simone the same day that he started on the book, which people have pointed out to me was also the same week that her exclusive contract expired. So she was on an expiring deal, there was controversy surrounding her book, and she is notorious for not necessarily wanting to cooperate when everything is being forced to fit into a mold. Given the way that timelines played out with DC Comics, it's likely that there was something to do with the Court of Owls storyline and not wanting to break off what she was doing in Batgirl. But for whatever reason, she was told by email that her services were no longer required in the book. Now, when that announcement was made, the outrage was substantial. Was anybody here out on the Twitters and the interwebs when that was going on? I don't know if you remember, but Gail Simone was actually briefly a top 10 trending topic in the United States, which is unheard of in comic books. Companies will pay people overtime on their social media teams to try and accomplish that when they are doing an event. And Gail Simone managed to do it by doing nothing else than saying on Twitter that she had been fired and was no longer going to be working on Batgirl, and asking everybody very nicely to read Ray Fawkes run on the book. This is pretty much the point where we see it indicated that she is at the peak of her powers as an influential person in comic books. Rich Johnston over at Bleeding Cool had a great note about it. She basically made herself bulletproof. The fact that DC was forced to rehire her less than 30 days later, she was fired on December 9th, and the announcement was made on December 22nd that she had been rehired. She was bulletproof, because what could they do? At that point, if she has a disagreement with her editor, is he going to fire her? Obviously they can't, because orders on the book went from 75,000 copies a month to, from retailers that I talked to and things you could find out, roughly about 22,000 copies a month. Which, if you follow the industry, you know is just right about the threshold where DC is going to say, we're going to cut this book. And the idea for them of cutting a Bat book, cutting Batgirl, which had consistently dueled with Wonder Woman for top 25 slots and the title of best-selling female-led book, was just unheard of. Had they cut that, having already lost Gail Simone, I think you probably would have seen women readers simply just walk away from the company. Any questions on the history, or anybody want to